What allowed for the rebuilding of a democracy after the Rwandan genocide, and can we use this model in other countries to unite the people? Before the genocide even began, a power struggle between Tutsi refugees who had formed the Rwandan Patriotic Front or RPF and the Hutus who controlled the government ended in the signing of the Arusha Peace Accords of 1993. In the year before the genocide would begin, the Hutus increased their paranoia of losing power to the Tutsis. They created a campaign of anti-Tutsi sentiment by labeling Hutus who married Tutsis as traitors and spreading their propaganda like the Hutu Ten Commandments across Rwanda. On April 6, 1994, the plane with the presidents of both Rwanda and Burundi was shot down while flying over the Rwandan capital. To this day, no one is sure who shot down the plane, but the crash left no survivors. This act of violence initiated the genocide in Rwanda that would last for 100 days. Between the months of April and July of 1994, violence rampaged its way through Rwanda. 800,000 people in Rwanda were murdered during a genocide that divided the two ethnicities within Rwanda. The Hutus organized a coup of the Tutsi-led government and ordered the mass extermination of all Tutsis. Those who refused to cooperate in the genocide were also murdered. In July of 1994, the RPF ended the genocide but began revenge killings on the Hutus. It is important to recognize the international structures that existed before violence broke out in Rwanda that were intended to prevent this type of disaster from occurring. Before the Rwandan genocide even began, the United Nations created a Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crimes of the Genocide in 1948, post-World War II, to prevent another Holocaust. A major facet of the ability for the Rwandan people to come together was the implementation of the Ngando camps, which were created to help integrate people who contributed to the genocide back into society. There are two types of camps that the Rwandan National Unity and Reconciliation Commission implemented. The first one targeted ex-convicts and were re-education camps, and the other one targeted government leaders, students, and teachers, and was more of a solidarity camp. However, some people in the international community view these re-education camps as a means for the RPF to disseminate pro-RPF ideologies and to further their agenda. The Ngando camps originally started in 1990 and were a 3-week school program that taught participants the ideologies of the RPF. After students attended the program, they were expected to share these ideologies within their communities back home. Whether the RPF is just trying to spread their agenda or not, I believe re-education programs are a critical necessity for uniting a nation after ethnic genocide. To enhance their effectiveness, these education programs are best taught by a third party, such as the UN or Amnesty International, not from the nation in question. Another method Rwanda has used to unite the country post-genocide was the implementation of new identity cards. When the Belgians took over Rwanda from Germany, they instituted the identification cards that included what ethnicity a person was, to further the already prevalent division between ethnicities. In an effort to unite the people of Rwanda after the genocide, the government got rid of the ethnicity part of the identification cards and limited discussion about the two ethnicities. Media played a huge role in both creating a society that enabled a mass genocide to occur and in leading the country towards democratic values post-1996. The extremist paper Kangaroo spread hateful rhetoric across Rwanda and even called for the extermination of Tutsis. The radio was also a predominant source of news for Rwandans, and in 1996, Hutus would call for the murder of specific people and families and lay out action plans for the next day. This quick communication enabled the Hutus to remain organized and in control. Acknowledging the influence the media had on the people and the ways reporters were able to use the radio and papers to spread their violent propaganda is important in understanding why, after the genocide ended, those in power increased media restrictions and self-censorship heavily. Under the veil of protecting Rwanda from another division incited by hateful rhetoric, journalists are under intense scrutiny to not only avoid criticism of specific ethnicities or groups of people, but also of political leaders or the government as a whole. Democracy is limited when journalists are prevented from making legitimate critiques on the government because it cannot bring light to injustices they may be contributing to. Recognizing that a right to a free press can be interpreted many different ways, I believe that the press that Rwanda currently has is free enough to be considered democratic. Although the government can and should take strides to give the media more freedom in what is written, changing an entire culture after 100 days of genocide takes time, and protecting citizens from journalists who may be inspired by past works from media groups like Kangaroo have a right to be legally challenged. The last measure that was critical in transforming Rwanda's genocidal regime into a democracy so quickly was the implementation of a court to prosecute those responsible for the genocide. In 1995, the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda opened in Arusha, Tanzania, to prosecute those who violated international humanitarian law in Rwanda from January of 1994 to December of 1994. This was another critical foundation to ensure justice in Rwanda after such a major violation of human rights. Of the 93 people indicted by the International Criminal Tribunal of Rwanda, 62 were sentenced, 14 were acquitted, and 10 were referred to national jurisdictions for trial. This tribunal was the first one to hold people accountable for genocide as was defined by the 1948 Geneva Convention. It was also the first tribunal to hold the media accountable for their actions, particularly those who used the radio to order more killings. Holding a fair trial where perpetrators can be tried for their actions is critical in showing citizens that these actions will not be tolerated again. After fully understanding the main 4 factors that helped Rwanda transition from genocide-ridden state to a democracy, we delve into the idea that these 4 factors could have been applied to another state that went through a similar circumstance. For this, we will look at Cambodia as a comparison. To give a brief background on Cambodia, from 1975 to 1979, 1.7 million Cambodians were killed while the Khmer Rouge ruled. Pol Pot changed the country's name in 1976 and declared it was year zero because he wanted to restart the nation. No one was safe in his regime. Those that were targeted first included doctors, those with an education, the wealthy, and minorities. The U.S. and other nations stood idly by as this regime continued its killing spree for 4 years. Even after the Khmer Rouge lost power, Cambodia remained unstable as Vietnam held power. In 1991, the first peace agreement was signed, and in 1993, the first election was held. It was not until 1997 that Pol Pot was arrested, but continued to be put on a simple house arrest. During the period of instability when Vietnam held power, the People's Revolutionary Tribunal put Pol Pot on trial, but this trial was seen as illegitimate because there was no due process and the trial was not impartial to both sides. In 2004, the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia was finally created in a partnership between the UN and Cambodian government. Looking back to Rwanda, there was 1 year between when the genocide in Rwanda ended and when the tribunal court was formed, compared to the 25 years before the end of the Khmer Rouge and the creation of the ECCC. Although there was an attempt for a tribunal 1 year after the genocide ended in Cambodia, it failed, further showing how it is critical to have a third party assist in the trial. After the genocide in Cambodia, there was no re-education program or attempt at helping the citizens transition back into a more peaceful society. Today, those that assisted in the Khmer Rouge killings live among those who were harmed. Many of the citizens live with severe PTSD and must deal with their trauma on their own. If an education class had been implemented in Cambodia after the war, it could have been tailored to help the Cambodian people with their trauma and teach them how to peacefully coexist with neighbors that may have had ties to the old regime. In the case for Cambodia, where the genocide was not caused by a split between ethnicities, there is less of a need for identification cards. However, other genocides like the one going on in Myanmar may need to implement new ID cards to their citizens to quell divisions. Free press is the other important factor in transitioning a country safely away from genocide. In the case of Cambodia, press is extremely limited, and again under the guise of being a protective force against hateful rhetoric that could cause more division. However, last year during the election, the opponent facing the current incumbent was put on trial, leading many to believe that democracy in Cambodia may be fading. Free press is a necessity in creating a transparent society where people can freely challenge the incumbent government and information can be shared no matter the topic. Transitioning into democracy after facing a genocide is not easy. It requires the collaboration of government and a third party to ensure justice, education programs to assist the citizens, a free press to allow for the media to share news,